All right, well this will be my third and final diatribe on the subject of what we need to know, what we should know, and referring to this book, Balance in Search of a Lost Sense, which is about the vestibular system or equilibrium. I'll see if I can just pull something out of this very quickly. There is some fascinating thinking that has to do with equilibrium, or which is the broader. The term equilibrium means or refers to the integration of a number of positional and balance processes, including vision, including the vestibular system, including proprioception and muscle tension and things like that, all come together to form equilibrium. So equilibrium is kind of the whole cake. The equilibrium is the summing of all these different forms of positional experience into this gestalt, where the vestibular system actually refers to an organ in the inner ear, and you've got two of them, behind the auditory part of the ear, and it shares the eighth cranial nerve, and a great deal of that data ends up going back directly to the cerebellum. So here on page 147, this intimate connection between the RAS, which means the reticular activating system, or it says this intimate connection between the vestibular system and the RAS is one reason vestibular stimulation is at the core of a controversial yet widely used therapy program for children and with certain types of behavioral and learning disorders called sensory integration. Point. When the body and all the senses work together efficiently, adaptive responses to changes in one's environment, for example, walking on a tilted irregular surface, and learning become easier. The first and most important sense to organize and integrate, according to Ayers, is the one that tells him about his own body and its relationship to the gravitational field of the earth. And these then become the building blocks that help him to develop the sense of sight and sound, which tell him about things that are distant from his body. So you see how this vestibular equilibrium process helps us distinguish between body and non-body, or self and non-self. She believed that the vestibular system was the unifying system for all sensory input, providing a framework for other aspects of our experience. Ayers' theory appears to explain why children up to the age of 4 seem to have an innate craving for vestibular stimulation, to the point of providing it for themselves with such spontaneous behaviors as rocking, bouncing, swaying, and head shaking. So I think you will find that in the three fields of rhetoric, logic, and dialectic, the vestibular system seems to be most closely connected, in my mind, to the field of what we would call rhetoric, where the visual system, in my mind, seems most closely related to that area which we would call logic, because logic tends to be very symbolic, and it tends to function in kind of symbolic ways, like with Venn diagrams, or if-then statements, or inclusion or exclusionary statements. That feeds to logic, which I believe is the most visual of those mental arts, where rhetoric, which has to do with convincing people and making believable, convincing, moving arguments, moving, right, you're tilting this way, seems to have a very vestibular language, and dialectic, which is the discursive back and forth discussion that we find in Plato, Socrates, appears to me, or sounds to me, like it is the most auditory of the arts. So logic, visual, rhetoric, vestibular equilibrium, dialectic, auditory. Okay, that's a very interesting way to take these classical arts of the field of argumentation and break them down into sensory zones. And so we could probably build our way up to a much more powerful NLP kind of model of argumentation if we combined that submodality stuff and the classical argumentation studies.